She had always believed in love the way some people believe in sunrise, steady, warm, and certain to return no matter how dark the night had been. To her, loyalty was not a choice. It was a promise you carried in your heart. And kindness was not weakness. It was strength, learned through pain and shaped by hope. From a young age, she had learned to give freely, her time, her trust, her care. People often said she loved too deeply, but she never saw it that way. She believed that if you held on to love with both hands, life would eventually reward you. And for a long time it felt like it had. Her closest companion through every season of life was her best friend. They had grown up side by side, sharing childhood dreams under open skies and whispered fears in quiet corners. When one cried, the other listened. When one fell, the other stood guard. They knew each other's stories better than anyone else ever could. They had survived hardship together, tight finances, broken homes, unspoken disappointments. They promised each other that one day life would be kinder. One day happiness would find them both. But as the years passed, life began to choose favorites. The protagonist's heart stayed open. She learned how to forgive, how to trust again, how to believe even when things were uncertain. Slowly, joy entered her life, not loudly but gently. She smiled more. She slept easier. Hope began to feel natural instead of forced. Her best friend noticed this change long before anyone else did. At first, it was only silence. Small pauses in conversations. A distant look when happiness was shared. But it was easy to miss. After all, everyone carried their own burdens. While one heart grew lighter, the other felt heavier. Her best friend's life had not followed the path she imagined. Dreams were delayed. Love never stayed. Every step forward felt followed by 2 steps back. And although she clapped when her friend succeeded, something inside her tightened each time. She told herself it was pride. She told herself she was happy. And maybe, in small moments, she was. But admiration slowly mixed with comparison. And comparison quietly turned into resentment. Still she stayed close. She offered advice. She asked questions. She made herself necessary. Her concern sounded caring, her warnings sounded wise. She masked envy with protection, insecurity with loyalty. To the outside world, their friendship looked perfect. But inside, something was shifting. The protagonist remained grateful for everything she had. She spoke often of blessings, of patience, of faith. She never noticed how these words landed like salt on an open wound. What she called gratitude, the other began to hear as unintentional pride. And yet nothing was said. Because some feelings grow best in silence. The tension was not loud. It lived in glances that lasted a second too long. In smiles that did not reach the eyes. In advice that carried a hidden edge. One heart rested in contentment, while the other wrestled with insecurity. Then came the announcement. It was meant to be a moment of joy, a simple sharing of good news. The words were spoken with excitement and trembling hope. She had found someone who treated her gently, someone who made her feel safe. She was getting married. The room felt still. Her best friend smiled first. She congratulated her. She offered hugs and kind words. Anyone watching would have seen nothing but support. But inside something broke. The future they once dreamed of together suddenly felt uneven. The promise they made as girls felt quietly rewritten. And for the first time, love no longer felt shared, it felt stolen. That night, as the celebration faded, a seed settled deep within her best friend's heart. And though no one heard it fall, it would soon grow loud enough to destroy everything. The man she was going to marry did not enter her life like a storm. He arrived gently, like calm after long rain. He was patient in his words, steady in his actions, and respectful in ways that made her feel seen without feeling owned. With him, love did not feel rushed or heavy. It felt safe. He listened when she spoke. He remembered small things. He did not promise perfection, only honesty. In a world that had often felt uncertain, he became a place where her heart could rest. Their decision to marry was not dramatic. It was careful, thoughtful, and full of hope. Families gathered with quiet joy. Elders offered blessings. Friends smiled and spoke of the future as if it were something solid, something waiting just ahead. Plans were made slowly. A home was imagined. Children were spoken of with shy laughter. The future felt open and kind. And through all of it, her best friend was always there. At first, her presence felt comforting. She helped with preparations. She offered advice about traditions, dates, and family matters. She volunteered to handle details others overlooked. Everyone praised her loyalty. She's like a sister, people said. The protagonist believed that too. She trusted her friend with everything, her worries, her hopes, her fears about becoming a wife. She shared her excitement freely, never imagining that each joyful word landed differently than she intended. Her best friend listened closely. Too closely. She watched how the husband treated her friend. She noticed the gentle care, the respect, the quiet affection. And without meaning to, she began to compare. She compared her friend's full heart to her own empty nights. She compared the warmth of the marriage to the silence in her own life. She compared the security her friend felt to the constant uncertainty she carried. But she never spoke these thoughts aloud. Instead, she smiled. She nodded. She offered help. Inside, the comparisons grew louder. When she sat with the couple, she felt like an observer instead of a companion. Their shared looks, their private understanding, reminded her of everything she lacked. What once felt like shared happiness now felt like exclusion. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself she just needed time. But slowly, admiration turned into quiet pain. She began to notice flaws where none had mattered before. She questioned small decisions. She raised concerns that sounded reasonable on the surface. Marriage changes people, she would say gently. You should be careful not to lose yourself, she would add softly. The words sounded caring, protective, wise. But beneath them was something new, something sharp. The husband noticed the closeness between the two women. He trusted it. He believed friendship was a gift, not a threat. When the best friend spoke, he listened politely, unaware of the silent weight her words carried. The protagonist, caught between love and loyalty, never questioned the advice. She had no reason to. This was the person who had always stood by her side. But her best friend began to feel entitled to a place she was never meant to hold. She answered questions before the wife could speak. She involved herself in private matters. She believed her opinion mattered more than it should. And each time she was included, something inside her felt briefly powerful. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel left behind. Yet the satisfaction never lasted. Because every reminder of the marriage reopened the wound. She began to believe that if she did not protect her friend, she might lose her. That if she did not stay involved, she would be replaced completely. And somewhere in that fear, envy took its first clear shape. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it was no longer harmless. By the time the wedding day drew near, the bond between the two women was no longer equal. One stood in gratitude. The other stood in silent competition. And deep within the best friend's heart, a dangerous thought began to form. If happiness could be shared, why did it feel so unfair? That thought did not yet have teeth, but it was learning how to bite. Jealousy does not always arrive like anger. Sometimes it comes dressed as sadness. Sometimes it hides behind questions that sound caring and thoughts that seem reasonable. For the best friend, it began quietly in moments when no one was watching. At night, when the world grew still, she lay awake replaying her life. The choices she made, the chances she missed, the love that never stayed. Each memory felt like proof that life had been unfair to her. She had tried, she told herself. She had been patient. So why did happiness come so easily to someone else? The thought returned again and again, growing heavier each time. She began to see her friend's joy differently. What once looked like blessing now felt like neglect. She told herself that her friend had changed, that marriage had made her distant, less present, less loyal. She ignored the truth that nothing had been taken from her. Instead, she focused on what she believed she deserved. Loneliness has a way of twisting thoughts. When her friend spoke excitedly about her husband, the best friend smiled, but her chest tightened. She began to believe that the happiness being shared was excessive, almost careless. As if joy should be rationed. As if it was wrong for one person to have so much while another had so little. And slowly, a new story formed in her mind. She convinced herself that her friend was becoming blind, too trusting, too soft. She began to believe that the marriage, though loving on the surface, might be hiding flaws. This belief did not come from proof but from need. Need to matter. Need to be needed. Need to feel important again. That was when her words began to change. Her advice became more pointed. Her concern more specific. She did not lie outright. Instead, she selected truths carefully, shaping them to fit her growing doubts. She would mention things casually, things set out of context, moments stretched slightly longer than they were. A delayed reply. A distracted look. Small details presented as warning signs. She framed her thoughts gently as if she was protecting her friend from future pain. She told herself she was doing the right thing. After all, hadn't she always been the one to notice danger first? But each suggestion carried weight. Each planted doubt took root quietly. The protagonist listened, not because she suspected anything was wrong, but because trust still lived fully in her heart. She had no reason to believe her best friend would ever lead her astray. The best friend felt a strange relief each time uncertainty flickered across her friend's face. It made her feel powerful, necessary, relevant. She hated that feeling. And yet she craved it. She told herself that she was only trying to balance things, that her friend's life had tilted too far into happiness, that it was her responsibility to keep her grounded, to make sure she did not lose herself in love. But the line between care and control blurred quickly. When the husband showed kindness, she questioned his motives. When he made mistakes, she magnified them. When he stayed silent, she filled the space with meaning. And each time her friend hesitated or worried, the best friend felt justified. Inside her, jealousy hardened into belief. Belief that she knew better. Belief that she deserved a place inside the marriage. Belief that if the truth hurt, it was still necessary. By the time she realized how far her thoughts had gone, she no longer wanted to stop. The role of protector felt too comfortable. The influence felt too real. Jealousy had stopped being a feeling. It had become a decision. And with that decision, the seed finally broke the surface. What followed would no longer be accidental. It would be deliberate. Doubt rarely enters a home through the front door. It slips in through small cracks, carried by whispers that sound harmless and questions that feel necessary. By the time it is noticed, it has already made itself comfortable. The best friend understood this well. She never spoke loudly. She never accused. She never demanded belief. Instead, she planted ideas gently, like seeds placed into soft soil. She chose moments when emotions were already fragile, times of stress, exhaustion, or silence. She would speak when her friend looked tired. She would suggest when her friend already felt unsure. Sometimes, it was only a sigh followed by a quiet thought. Other times, it was a careful reminder of something small that suddenly felt important. People show their true selves after marriage, she would say softly. Love doesn't always mean honesty, she would add gently. The words hovered in the air long after they were spoken. The protagonist began noticing things she had once ignored. A late return. A short reply. A distracted expression. None of it meant much on its own, but doubt has a way of connecting unrelated moments. She did not accuse her husband. She did not confront him. Instead, she watched. She wondered. She worried. Trust did not shatter. It thinned. The husband sensed the change but could not name it. Conversations felt different. Her laughter came slower. Her eyes searched his face more than before. He asked if something was wrong, but she struggled to explain a feeling that had no clear source. Meanwhile, the best friend continued her quiet work. She spoke to the husband too, just enough to appear caring. She asked about his responsibilities, his stress, his expectations. She framed her questions as concern for her friend's happiness. But even her kindness carried an edge. She mentioned how sensitive her friend was, how deeply she felt things, how easily she worried. These words did not sound harmful, but they created distance. The husband began feeling misunderstood. He felt like his actions were being measured instead of trusted. He wondered why his intentions no longer felt clear. And still nothing was said openly. Small misunderstandings began to stack upon one another. A message left unread. A plan changed without notice. A tone misheard. Each moment added weight to the silence between them. The protagonist felt torn. On one side was the man she loved. On the other was the friend who had always stood beside her. Both felt important. Both felt fragile. She questioned herself more than anyone else. Maybe she was expecting too much. Maybe marriage required sacrifice she had not prepared for. Maybe her friend was right to warn her. The confusion grew heavy. At night, she lay awake thinking, replaying conversations in her mind. Words spoken by her best friend echoed louder than her husband's actions. Doubt has a way of amplifying voices that confirm fear. She still loved her husband. That had not changed. But trust was no longer simple. The best friend watched the distance grow and told herself she was doing the right thing. She believed she was helping her friend see clearly. That if the marriage survived, it would be stronger. She ignored the quiet thrill she felt each time uncertainty appeared. She ignored the guilt that tried to surface. Because the damage was still invisible. The marriage had not broken. It only bent. And bent things can still be repaired, if someone notices in time. But the whispers continued. And with every passing day, the space between love and doubt grew wider, even as no one could point to a single moment when everything changed. By the time the protagonist realized she no longer felt secure, the ground beneath her marriage had already begun to shift. Trust was still there, but it was no longer whole. What began as whispers soon learned how to speak clearly. The best friend no longer waited for moments of doubt to appear on their own. She began guiding them, shaping them, feeding them carefully. Her presence in the marriage was no longer quiet, it was constant. She knew when to speak, when to pause, and when to appear concerned enough to be trusted. She positioned herself as the bridge between two people who were slowly drifting apart. When the protagonist felt confused, the best friend was there to listen. When the husband felt misunderstood, the best friend offered herself as a calm voice. To both of them she presented the same face, supportive, reasonable, loyal. But the words she shared were never the same. With her friend she spoke of distance, of emotional changes, of signs that should not be ignored. She framed every doubt as protection, every warning as love. With the husband she spoke of sensitivity, of pressure, of expectations that were hard to meet. She suggested patience, but also hinted at emotional strain. Each conversation sounded harmless on its own. Together they formed a quiet wedge. The husband began to feel judged for things he could not explain. He sensed that something he had not done was being held against him. The warmth he once felt in his home now felt uncertain. The protagonist, caught between fear and loyalty, began withdrawing emotionally. She did not want conflict. She did not want to accuse. So she held her pain inside, letting it grow in silence. And the best friend watched. She noticed how her influence deepened, how her words mattered more than she ever imagined. She began to feel entitled to this power, as if she had earned it through years of friendship. She told herself she deserved a place in the marriage because she had always been there first. But love is not a competition. The irony was cruel. The one person the protagonist trusted without question was the same person slowly dismantling her peace. Every reassurance from her best friend carried another hidden blade. Moments of vulnerability became opportunities. When the protagonist cried, the best friend reminded her of past warnings. When the husband grew distant, the best friend interpreted his silence. Nothing was ever allowed to stand on its own. Truth was filtered. Intentions were questioned. Small mistakes were treated like patterns. The marriage grew tense. The husband tried to speak openly, but his words seemed to land wrong. Every attempt at reassurance felt insufficient. He began to wonder if love alone was no longer enough. The protagonist felt emotionally stranded. She loved her husband, yet she no longer felt secure. She trusted her friend, yet her heart felt heavier each time they spoke. She started believing she was losing both clarity and control. At night, she stared into darkness, wondering how something so gentle had become so painful. She searched for a single moment to blame, but everything had happened too quietly. Meanwhile, the best friend felt a hollow satisfaction. The closeness she feared losing was now fully hers. She was needed. She was consulted. She mattered again. But the victory felt strange. It did not bring peace. It brought restlessness. Still she pressed forward. Because stopping now would mean admitting the truth, to herself most of all. The final betrayal was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply the moment when trust fractured enough to be felt. A misunderstanding escalated beyond repair. A doubt was no longer eased. An explanation was no longer believed. The marriage stood on fragile ground. And for the first time the damage was undeniable. The bond between husband and wife did not break completely. But it cracked wide enough for pain to pour through. And standing just beside the fracture was the one person who claimed to be holding it together. By the time the marriage began to fall apart, neither of them could remember when it first started slipping. There was no single argument to point to, no clear betrayal to name. Only a deep exhaustion that settled into their bones and refused to leave. Love was still there. That was the cruelest part. They sat in the same rooms but felt miles apart. Conversations turned careful, then short, then rare. Words felt dangerous now, too easy to twist, too hard to explain. Each silence carried more weight than any argument ever had. The husband tried to hold on. He asked questions, offered reassurance, searched her face for the warmth that once came so easily. But every time he reached out, he felt resistance he could not understand. It was as if he was being judged for crimes never explained to him. The protagonist felt torn apart inside. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that love was enough. But doubt had wrapped itself around her thoughts so tightly that she could no longer tell where fear ended and truth began. She felt guilty for questioning him and guilty for not questioning enough. Every emotion pulled her in a different direction. When she spoke, her words came out wrong. When she stayed quiet, the silence grew louder. She replayed every warning she had been given, every concern raised, every moment she had brushed aside too quickly. What if she had ignored signs she should have seen? What if she was protecting a lie without knowing it? These thoughts haunted her. The husband, feeling constantly misunderstood, began to withdraw. Not out of anger but out of weariness. He felt like he was always defending himself, always proving his intentions. The home that once felt safe now felt tense. Love without trust became unbearable. Arguments, when they happened, were quiet and painful. There were no raised voices, only tired eyes and shaking breaths. Each discussion ended the same way, with nothing truly resolved. They were both hurting but in different ways. And between them, always present, was the quiet influence of the best friend. She listened patiently as the protagonist cried. She offered comfort, wrapped in sympathy. She spoke gently of strength, of knowing one's worth, of not accepting less than respect. Outwardly, she was the perfect support. Inwardly, she felt a hollow sense of accomplishment. The marriage she once feared had now weakened enough to rely on her presence. She had become the emotional anchor, the voice of reason, the one who understood. But even she could feel it now, the weight of what she had done. The collapse did not come with shouting or doors slammed shut. It came slowly, like something giving up after fighting too long. One night, the words finally surfaced. Not harsh words. Not cruel ones. Just tired truths spoken through tears and resignation. They both admitted what they could no longer deny. They were hurting each other without knowing how to stop. There was no hatred in the decision. Only sadness. They agreed to step away, believing space might heal what closeness no longer could. But deep down, both felt the same quiet fear, that something precious had already been lost. The separation felt unreal at first. The protagonist moved through her days as if wrapped in fog. She felt responsible, confused, broken. She questioned every choice she had made, every moment she had trusted, every word she had believed. The husband carried his pain in silence. He felt rejected without being accused, blamed without explanation. The distance cut deeper than any argument ever could. And the best friend stayed close. She held the protagonist as she cried. She reassured her that she had done the right thing. She spoke of healing and new beginnings. But when she was alone, the satisfaction she expected never came. Instead, she felt empty. The marriage was over, not because love had died, but because it had been worn down, piece by doubt and interference and silence. Loss settled heavily over all of them. And though no one said it aloud, the truth lingered in the air. Some wounds are not caused by enemies. They are caused by those we trust the most. After the separation, life did not stop. It moved forward without asking if anyone was ready. Days passed, routines returned, and the world continued as if nothing had broken. But for her, everything felt unfamiliar. The house felt quieter than she expected. Not peaceful, empty. Every corner carried echoes of a life she thought would last. She moved through her days slowly, weighed down by questions that never rested. People talked. Some asked gently, others assumed loudly. Advice came from every direction, often uninvited. She nodded, thanked them, and carried the weight alone. No explanation ever felt complete, because she did not fully understand it herself. At night, regret grew louder. She replayed moments over and over again. The early laughter. The gentle gestures. The first signs of distance she had brushed aside. She wondered when things truly went wrong and how she had missed it. Had she asked the wrong questions? Had she trusted the wrong voice? These thoughts kept her awake long after sleep should have come. The husband withdrew into his own world. He limited contact, not out of anger but self-protection. The pain was still too raw. Every conversation reopened wounds that had not healed. He carried his heartbreak quietly. He questioned himself, wondering if love had failed or if he had. The uncertainty followed him everywhere. And still the best friend remained. She visited often. She listened. She comforted. She filled the silence with presence. To anyone watching, she looked like loyalty personified. But something about her had changed. Her smiles came late. Her reassurances felt rehearsed. She avoided certain topics, certain memories. The warmth she once carried now felt uneven, like a light flickering behind closed curtains. The protagonist noticed it in small ways. Pauses where there used to be understanding. Deflections where there used to be honesty. At first she dismissed the feeling. Grief could distort perception. She told herself she was overthinking. She clung to the comfort she had left. Yet a quiet unease settled in her chest. She began sensing gaps in the stories she had been told. Advice that once felt helpful now sounded repetitive. Warnings repeated too often, as if rehearsed rather than remembered. The emptiness in her life made these details louder. She felt isolated even when she wasn't alone. The loneliness cut deeper because it existed in company. She had lost her marriage, and now she felt unsure about the one person she thought she still had. The best friend began pulling back without realizing it. The role she had played so confidently now felt heavy. Guilt crept in through moments of silence she could not fill. She had wanted closeness. She had not expected this distance. The protagonist sensed something was wrong, not clearly, not fully, but enough to unsettle her. A feeling pressed against her thoughts, asking to be noticed. Something had been taken from her. And it was not just her marriage. As the days passed, that feeling grew stronger. The comfort she leaned on no longer felt safe. The answers she had trusted no longer felt complete. And deep inside, a quiet realization began to form. What if the truth had been standing beside her all along? Truth does not always arrive in a single moment. Sometimes, it comes in fragments, small, sharp pieces that cut slowly as they settle into place. For her, it began with memories that no longer stayed quiet. She noticed it during ordinary moments. A thought would surface uninvited. A memory would replay itself differently than before. Words once spoken with comfort now echoed with unease. She began recalling conversations with her best friend, how certain warnings appeared before problems ever existed. How doubt had been planted long before proof followed. At the time it had felt like care. Now it felt calculated. She remembered how often her friend had spoken for her, interpreting feelings she had never expressed. How concerns were repeated until they felt real. How reassurance always came wrapped around fear. These realizations did not strike all at once. They arrived slowly, painfully, like light entering a dark room through a narrow crack. She began noticing inconsistencies. Details her best friend once emphasized were suddenly unclear. Stories shifted slightly each time they were told. Advice that had seemed urgent now felt exaggerated. What once sounded like insight now sounded like influence. Her chest tightened as patterns emerged. She recalled moments when she had doubted her husband without understanding why. Times when trust had weakened even though no clear wrong had been done. Those doubts had not been born inside her. They had been guided there. The realization hurt more than the separation itself. Because this was not betrayal by an enemy. This was betrayal by love. She sat alone one evening, replaying everything from the beginning. The happiness she once shared. The early warnings. The growing fear. The final distance. Each moment lined up too neatly to ignore. The truth was not dramatic. It was devastating. Her best friend had been present at every turning point. Every doubt had been shaped. Every fear had been fed. And she, blinded by loyalty, had never questioned it. Grief washed over her in waves. Grief for the marriage she lost. Grief for the trust she misplaced. Grief for the friendship she thought was real. She felt foolish, then angry, then unbearably sad. Her hands trembled as she realized how deeply she had been manipulated. How carefully her insecurities had been used against her. She wondered how long it had been happening. Where concern had ended and control had begun. How jealousy had hidden itself so well behind kindness. Memories reframed themselves with cruel clarity. Smiles that lingered too long. Advice that always pointed one way. Support that never encouraged understanding, only distance. Everything made sense now. And that clarity broke her heart all over again. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on her chest. She wanted to deny it, to believe she was imagining things. But denial could not erase the pattern she now saw so clearly. The pain was sharper because it came from someone she loved without fear. Her closest bond had caused her deepest loss. She did not confront anyone. Not yet. She needed time to breathe, to grieve, to understand how everything she trusted had been quietly undone. But one thing was certain now. The story she had believed was false. And the truth, once seen, could not be unseen. Fate rarely arrives with warning. It does not knock politely. Instead, it moves in ways both subtle and certain, nudging lives until the balance is restored, or broken. And when it chooses to speak, its voice cannot be ignored. For her best friend, fate began quietly, almost imperceptibly. She had felt satisfaction in her influence, power in the whispered doubts and carefully guided fears. But the hollow sense of triumph she expected never fully came. There were gaps she could not fill. Silences she could not control. And soon life began to respond in ways she did not foresee. It started with the small things. Friends began noticing inconsistencies in her stories, in the advice she repeated. People who had trusted her once began asking questions. Casual remarks, once accepted at face value, now drew suspicion. It was subtle at first, a glance, a question, but it was enough. Enough to plant unease where confidence had once stood. Her influence over the protagonist, The very thing she had relied on to feel indispensable began to falter. She could no longer shape feelings with the same ease. Advice that once felt necessary now seemed overbearing. Concern that had felt caring now appeared controlling. People started to see her not as a loyal friend, but as a presence with hidden motives. Her social circle, once attentive and admiring, grew distant. Invitations became fewer. Conversations became cautious. She felt the weight of scrutiny, the cold brush of judgment, and it unnerved her in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time she understood what it felt like to be excluded, to be powerless. Meanwhile, the protagonist was healing. She carried her scars with dignity, but she also began noticing the cracks in the facade of her former friend. The one who had seemed unwavering was now unsteady, flustered by the consequences she could not predict. Guilt followed closely behind isolation. The best friend, who had thought she was protecting and guiding, now felt the sting of responsibility for the heartbreak she had caused. At first, she tried to rationalize her actions. She told herself she had acted out of care, out of concern, out of love. But even the explanations no longer rang true. Each time she tried, her own conscience contradicted her. Fate's justice was neither loud nor vengeful. It was quiet, relentless, and impartial. The life she had wanted to control began to slip through her fingers. People trusted her less, and with each lost bond, her sense of power diminished. The admiration she had once taken for granted was replaced by distance. The attention she had manipulated faded, leaving only the weight of her own actions. She realized, slowly, painfully, that manipulation comes at a cost. The satisfaction she had sought could never exist alongside truth. Her victories had been empty because they were built on deception. And now, life was forcing her to face what she had done, not through anger or confrontation but through exposure and consequence. The protagonist observed all of this from a distance, quietly aware but unmoved by vengeance. She did not rejoice. She did not mock. She only acknowledged the balance returning. She understood that fate does not need her approval. It simply acts, and those who sow pain eventually encounter the harvest. And the best friend, once so confident, now faced herself with no masks left to hide behind. Trust she had taken for granted was gone. Reputation she had relied upon now questioned. Peace she had assumed she deserved now impossible to claim. Every action she had taken had consequences, and there was no one left to shield her from them. Fate spoke softly but unmistakably, actions have weight. Betrayal cannot remain hidden forever. And love, once lost to manipulation, leaves marks that even time cannot erase. By the end the contrast was stark. The protagonist, wounded but growing, moved toward healing and clarity. The best friend, once close and indispensable, faced solitude, reflection, and the relentless weight of accountability. Karma did not shout. It simply arrived, quietly, without fanfare and with absolute fairness. The lesson settled between them both, unspoken but undeniable. Life has a way of balancing itself. Those who harm others with envy and deceit eventually meet the consequences, not always through punishment but through truth and exposure. And the heart, once broken by betrayal, can still find peace, not in revenge but in clarity and self-discovery. Fate had spoken, and its voice could not be ignored. The moment of confrontation did not come with shouting. It did not come with accusations or anger. It came with stillness, with a quiet understanding that could no longer be ignored. The protagonist looked at her former best friend, not with hatred but with clarity. Every memory, every manipulation, every carefully planted doubt now sat between them like invisible weight. She did not need words to confirm what had happened. Her heart already knew. Her gaze was steady. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She spoke nothing, yet everything was understood. The best friend, for the first time in years, felt that gaze fully upon her. She could not hide behind concern or care. She could not twist words or shade intentions. The silence was heavy, undeniable, and suffocating. Inside she felt the weight of every action she had taken. Each manipulation, each carefully crafted warning, each subtle interference, she saw them now as they truly were. There was no one else to blame. No excuses left to lean on. She had caused pain where love once lived. She had betrayed the trust of someone she had claimed to cherish more than anyone else. The realization hit her in full, raw force. And yet, there was no outward confession. No tears, no pleas. Just the quiet recognition of the truth she had tried so hard to ignore. The silence between them carried more meaning than any argument could. The protagonist felt the surge of emotion she had carried for months, grief, anger, sorrow, but she did not let them spill outward. She had learned that true strength is quiet. That clarity does not require vengeance. That facing the truth without losing yourself is the ultimate act of courage. She acknowledged the betrayal. She named it silently in her mind. She accepted it. And in that acceptance there was power. The best friend could feel the shift. For years she had held control, shaped emotions, guided choices. But now control had slipped from her hands. The protagonist no longer questioned, no longer faltered, no longer allowed manipulation to take root. The power she had wielded so carefully was gone, not taken by force but surrendered by understanding. There was a heavy lesson in that moment. Influence built on deceit cannot survive in the face of truth. The best friend's face revealed what words never could: guilt, shame, and a dawning comprehension of the life she had fractured. She had built illusions, and now she faced the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. No explanations could undo the past. No apologies could erase the pain she had caused. And the protagonist, having faced the truth fully, finally let herself breathe. She had confronted the betrayal without anger, without retaliation, without needing to control the outcome. She had recognized it, named it, and accepted it, and in that act she reclaimed herself. For the first time she understood that separation was not just physical. It was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. It was a letting go of illusions, of misplaced loyalty, of a bond that had never been as it seemed. The best friend remained, staring into the quiet, realizing that her own life had changed irrevocably. Power, attention, trust, all had been lost. She was left alone with the weight of her actions, forced to reckon with the truth she had hidden even from herself. And the protagonist walked away, not in anger but with a sense of closure. Not with revenge but with understanding. Not with bitterness but with quiet strength. Some confrontations need no words. They need only clarity, awareness, and the courage to face what has been done. In that stillness the balance finally shifted. The illusions dissolved. The control passed, not into another's hands, but back to the heart that had been hurt. The chapter closed quietly, leaving behind the undeniable truth. Some separations are not just about leaving someone behind, they are about leaving behind what was never real. Healing did not arrive quickly. It never does. For the protagonist, it began in small moments. Early mornings when sunlight felt soft enough to enter her room, evenings when she could breathe without the weight of constant worry. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She took tentative steps toward life again. At first it was simple things. Walking outside, opening her mailbox, replying to messages she had ignored for months. Each small act reminded her that she still existed outside of the heartbreak, outside of the influence that had nearly destroyed her trust. She remembered the love she once held, the joy she had known, and she let herself feel it again, carefully, without fear. Slowly, she learned to separate memory from manipulation, to distinguish what had been real from what had been twisted. It was painful to sort the two, but necessary. Forgiveness came differently. She did not forgive her former best friend for the sake of reconciliation. She did not attempt to repair what was broken beyond repair. Instead, she forgave to release herself. Forgiveness became an act of freedom, a way to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. She realized that holding on to anger would only trap her in the past, preventing her from moving forward. She also learned to set boundaries, firm, unyielding boundaries that protected her heart and her trust. She understood that love and loyalty are precious, but they must never come at the cost of self-respect. She would no longer allow another person's envy or insecurity to dictate her happiness. Rebuilding herself was neither fast nor easy. There were days when grief returned, when memories of lost love felt like sharp knives. There were nights when tears came unbidden, and the silence of her home felt suffocating. But even in those moments, she discovered resilience she had never recognized in herself. Each tear became a reminder that she was still alive, still feeling, still capable of hope. She focused on the things that had once brought her joy, friendships that were genuine, hobbies that had been neglected, small acts of kindness she could offer herself and others. In doing so, she began to reclaim a life that was fully her own, a life not shadowed by manipulation or doubt. The lessons she learned were clear. She learned to trust carefully, to observe deeply, and to value herself above the expectations of others. She realized that self-worth does not come from how others treat you, but from how you see yourself. She began to understand that love without respect is fragile, and that trust, once broken, can only be rebuilt with honesty and transparency. Slowly hope returned. Not the naive hope of the past, but a quiet, steady hope grounded in knowledge and experience. She recognized her strength, not in the absence of pain, but in her ability to survive it and grow stronger because of it. And in this growth, she discovered a new kind of peace. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was enduring. She could now face the future without fear of betrayal, without the shadows of jealousy clouding her heart. She had learned to walk alone when necessary, and to walk with others when it was safe and reciprocal. The journey had changed her. She was no longer the same person who had trusted blindly. She was wiser, stronger, and more compassionate, not only toward others but toward herself. She had reclaimed her life, her joy, and her dignity. And as she looked ahead, she understood something vital. True happiness is built on self-respect, clarity, and inner peace. It cannot be taken, manipulated, or stolen. She smiled quietly, feeling the weight lift. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled her. She was whole again in her own way. She had healed, forgiven, and rediscovered herself. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to live fully, freely, and with hope that would never again depend on another's envy. Some lessons do not come through words or warnings. They arrive through experience, through pain, through the slow understanding that every choice carries weight. The story of her friendship, her marriage, and the betrayal she endured serves as a reminder that jealousy, even when hidden behind love, can destroy what is most sacred. Betrayal from someone you trust cuts deeper than any enemy could. It leaves scars not only on the heart but on the soul. She had learned this truth fully, through the heartbreak of a marriage that dissolved, through the quiet unraveling of a bond she once thought unbreakable, through the long months of isolation and self-questioning. Yet within that pain there was clarity. She understood now that happiness built on manipulation, envy, or deceit is fragile. It can appear beautiful, even comforting, but it is always temporary. True happiness, she realized, requires honesty, respect, and trust, not just in others but in yourself. The story also carries a warning for those who choose to harm. Actions driven by jealousy, greed, or desire for control may feel victorious at first, but fate has a way of restoring balance. The best friend, who once seemed untouchable, eventually faced the consequences of her choices. Isolation, guilt, and the erosion of trust became her companions. Life exposed what she had tried to hide, and she could no longer deny the weight of her own decisions. Yet the moral is not about revenge. It is about accountability. Life, fate, and truth do not need to punish through anger. They work quietly, steadily, and fairly. Every action, every choice, carries echoes that return to us in ways we may not expect but cannot escape. And for the one who suffered, there is hope. Healing is possible. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, though carefully, wisely, and differently. Love can be experienced again, but the lessons remain. Strength comes not from retaliation, but from understanding. Peace comes not from reclaiming the past, but from reclaiming yourself. Boundaries, discernment, and self-worth are the tools she discovered. Forgiveness, not for others but for oneself, becomes a shield and a release. She learned to cherish genuine connections, to nurture relationships grounded in honesty, and to recognize the warning signs of envy and manipulation before they grow destructive. This story also speaks to the quiet forces of fate. It reminds us that life balances itself. Betrayal, dishonesty, and envy may appear hidden, but truth cannot be contained forever. Actions have consequences, sometimes delayed, sometimes subtle, but always certain. And those who harm others, even unintentionally, must eventually face the weight of their choices. Above all, the tale emphasizes the value of inner strength. It celebrates the courage required to rebuild a life after heartbreak, to forgive without forgetting, and to rediscover oneself without bitterness. It honors the journey of reclaiming trust, both in oneself and in the world, and the wisdom gained through adversity. And finally, it leaves us with a quiet, enduring truth. Happiness that comes at the expense of others never lasts. Love that is nurtured by envy cannot thrive. Trust that is broken by betrayal must be rebuilt on the foundation of truth. And the heart, though wounded, can always find its way back to peace when it chooses courage over fear, understanding over anger, and self-respect over dependence. Life teaches us in ways that cannot be ignored. And in this story, that lesson echoes long after the last chapter is read. Loyalty, honesty, and love are precious, but fragile. Protect them, honor them, and never let jealousy or deceit shadow the light they bring. Happiness, when built on integrity and self-awareness, endures. And in that, there is hope for all who have suffered and for all who choose to rise above betrayal.